All right, our frank talk continues with Floyd Shivambu. Floyd, what's your analysis of? By the way, I would like to know. I've always wanted to ask you this question: how do you find the quality of economic debate in Parliament? Because you seem, during the State of the Nation address that I've watched, at least the last two, you seem to obliterate quite a number of your parliamentary MPs. I'm not sure whether that is the same quality of debate in the subcommittees. For example, subcommittee on finance, subcommittee on public enterprises, subcommittee on DTI. You know, we worry because all we can see maybe is that small window where you are debating there. You can deal with that question as you tell me. What's your analysis of the South African economy at the moment? Just give me some 2 or 3 big highlights.
To understand the South African economy, you should appreciate that in the transition period, in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, the apartheid government handed over partial power to the liberation forces and didn't hand over the economy. That is why we say in the EFF that what has happened was just to hand over political power without economic power. And partial political power, by the way, I'll explain that in terms of what it means. And there was no economic power, and that is meaningless because it doesn't change the lives of the people. So if you were to check the cabinet of President Mandela in 1994, all the key strategic economic sectors were occupied by the white minorities who were representing the National Party. So the Minister of Finance was Derek Keys. The Minister of Minerals and Energy was Pik Botha. The Minerals of Agriculture and Land was Andre van Niekerk. The Reserve Bank Governor continued to be Chris Stolz, who was appointed in 1989. So you could see that they wanted to retain control of strategic sectors of the economy. And once they had inducted the ANC into the new liberal economic framework which they had drafted, and once they inducted the ANC into retention of white economic power, then they pulled out of the government of national unity in 1996, and then the ANC continued with the same economic apartheid architecture which had been designed to basically empower the white minorities. So that is where we have been. And then with the adoption of GIA in 1996 and heavy protection of the white capitalist interest. So what it means currently is that 1994 could have abolished some parts of political apartheid, but economic apartheid is a reality. And what are the features of such an economic apartheid? It's concentration in few hands. Like, it's monopolized economy. Like, very few people are in control of bigger portions of South Africa's economy. It's huge inequalities which are racialized. And one thing which most people do not read deeply into when they look into South Africa's inequalities is the fact that it's racialized. So like, if you were to take the white population only and gauge their developmental indicators, unemployment, poverty levels, they will be number 10 or number 11 in the world economies. So unemployment levels amongst white people is like 7% or less. That is where France, Germany, Austria and all these developed nations are. But amongst the black population, the unemployment levels is 42%. Poverty levels, it's the same in terms of all the developmental indicators, that we still have the racialized economic inequalities that were bequeathed by apartheid, meaning that apartheid was not decisively dealt with in terms of economic redistribution of wealth. Because the ANC just got into the band and said, let's continue with it. Let us go into the global system, capital markets, and attract investments and do all these things. And that has not borne any fruits for our people. There has not been any emergence of major industrial role players in South Africa since 1994. There's not been a creation of a state-owned company to the equivalent of ISCO, which was created by apartheid, to the equivalent of ESCOM, which was created under apartheid, to the equivalent of Sasol, which was created under apartheid. There's not been any major state-driven economic growth since 1994. So there's been directionlessness that is underpinned by the ANC's incompetence, but also the sucking up to the global capitalist establishment. You were correctly saying earlier on that in 1992, President Mandela went to Davos, basically with a framework to explain that we were jailed, we were exiled, we were banished, we were killed because of the Freedom Charter. Now that we are about to take power, we're going to implement the Freedom Charter. And in a split second, that Davos changed his perspective. And he said, no, it looks like we cannot survive with these economic policies. And you must understand that that was in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he just fell into the trap because Davos is basically a platform where the global billionaires go to mislead governments. And basically they go there to look at them to say, no, do this, do this, do this, and your economy is going to grow. And they are not telling the truth. In most instances, they say, do this so that they can continue to maximize.
There's evidence, at least in the side of South Africa,
yes, there is evidence
that there has not been a dividend, reaped from that Doha connection. But wouldn't have things been worse if Mandela went there and just repeated after the Freedom Charter? Because given that, remember, we inherited a country that was bankrupt, and we had to now recover somehow to stabilize.
Do you know, like a proper reading of the world's economic history now points to the reality that there has never been massive economic expansion that is not state-led, including the early industrializers. Like the early industrializing countries, the British, the Americas, and some parts of Europe. Whenever they had to drive industrial expansion, which translate into what? Economic growth. It was state-led or state-protected. Some degree of protectionism applied to all forms of industrialization. So all the countries that came later in terms of Japan, South Korea, all of them were state-led. Currently, China is catching up or is caught up in terms of one of the most developing economies.
But wouldn't you say that
state-anchored?
But wouldn't you say there was that understanding, Floyd?
And to think that market forces, without decisive guidance and leadership of the state, will develop an economy is daydreaming. Like anyone who thinks that is being ahistorical doesn't pay attention to truthful economic history that has been happening. And they just go and listen to the master narrative, which is basically nonsense that says that allow the markets to develop an economy. It has never happened anyway. Someone must illustrate to us which economy has developed due to market forces without state leadership.
Don't you think, though, right, that that was a common understanding one way or another, even though it was badly executed, in that you had, 700 SOEs in almost every sector of this economy. There's some state-owned enterprise. They have not been sold off. They have not been, most of them have not even attracted private sector partners, right, to dilute the fact that they are state-owned or municipally owned or provincially owned, and so. So don't you think that indeed there was that understanding that the state must play a role in development, that hence you maintained your ESCOMs of this world, you maintained your telecoms? I mean, there's a bit of privatization of telecom somewhat, but largely the big SOEs are still in the hands of the state. It's only now that people are jittery that they may be sold off and whatever else.
Look, I think the reading one first of the number of state-owned companies is wrong. So like I saw the president of the ANC said 700. I think he includes regulatory bodies as well, and some of the non-business entities that are either Schedule 2 or Schedule 3.
You're saying that number shouldn't be taken too seriously?
No. The number is far much lesser in terms of what happens, and then they exist in different departments. But those play a very important role in terms of driving economic development. Because they are not driven by the profit motive. They are driven by the developmental agenda and understanding that we have to meet the basic needs of our people. So ESCOM, of course, it must be run in a very efficient way. It must be able to sustain itself financially. But its motive primarily should be to provide dependable electricity to all South Africans, to all industries, to everything else. That must be the primary motive. But if ESCOM is in private hands, there won't be a private company that will take electricity to Malamlele or to Mhlabalingana or to wherever, or to Gauteng municipality or to Mamusa, if the people of Mamusa are not going to give him money, which is going to become profit later. So the reality is that if you give like an essential human right now, electricity is no longer a luxury. It's a human right, basic human right. If you give that to a private sector, a lot of our people are not going to be electrified because the private sector is primarily driven by the profit motive.
Yeah.
The state should continue to control those areas. But also you can utilize that to attract a lot of investments domestically. And I must deal with that because this obsession with foreign investments, although it is important, is what is a misguided attention of the current administration, which I think is the most incompetent group of people ever to happen to any way in terms of what happens. So the state should play an important role. If we had continued ownership and control of Sasol, make sure that it plays a developmental role. Maybe we're going to be the first to build an oil refinery in Africa. Currently it's Dangote in Nigeria. Yes, in Nigeria.
But also Sasol tried something in the US that imploded.
Yes, like we could have done it in South Africa to then deal with a proper trade balance, because majority of the imports that come are on the energy and oil sector.
Those kind of projects, Floyd, what's wrong with PPPs? Can you just address me on PPPs? You've just talked now about local investment. That assumes a level of private sector involvement, right? What would be wrong with saying, we can't do the same thing over and over again and be failing? You have SAA that's been guzzling billions, right? Pair them with Ethiopian Airlines. Pair them with something else. You still retain the majority. The same way that you have argued that even with mines, you're not arguing for 100% takeover. You're saying the state must be in control. So SAA, state-owned 51%, 49% give it to another airline to run, who know what they are doing, who may even have subsidies of oil from where they come from, etc., who can raise this thing. What's wrong with that model?
Now, if you check in the founding manifesto of the EFF, where we speak about the nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy,
yes,
we do not rule out a possibility of strategic equity partnerships, not in a narrower sense. So we say that in all strategic sectors of the economy, the state must at least be exposed for a minimum of 60%. And then you can still have strategic equity partners that can play a meaningful role in terms of what should happen. Because even our model of state ownership discourages a phenomenon where it's a single ministry who is a representative shareholder in a state-owned company. Because they get the temptation to want to interfere on the daily operations of that state-owned company.
But the opposite of that,
like Pravin Gordhan is doing in
5 ministries trying to control one SOA, and then the boards, and they don't know who to listen to. And the SAA has suffered that.
If you were to check who are the shareholders of AXA now, which is one of the most successful state-owned companies, like the Airports Company of South Africa, its ownership includes the Public Investment Corporation, it includes government, it includes some private shareholders as well, but they are not majority. The state has got exposure of more than 70%. It is well run, it is well monitored, it cannot be interfered with in the same manner in which Pravin Gordhan could go to Transnet and say that I understand you have interviewed people for CEO positions, but I want you to appoint someone else who was not interviewed. So we need to have a different model of state ownership in terms of how do we deal with the control issues, because there will always be a temptation for a minister to try to impose either their friend or someone whom they went to school with, or someone whom they know that is friends of their funders, so that when they do deals, let's say in Praza, they will then shift those deals to benefit them privately. I want to talk about... It's one of the issues that must be dealt with in a far much more substantial way. And it's one of the issues that must be graduated from this narrower debate that shift ESCOM from DPE to the Department of Energy. It's a far much more complex discussion.
All right, I've got to take a break now, Floyd. Thank you so much for that, but we will carry on. I want to tap your brain some more while we are still on the public enterprise thing, on the Pravin phenomenon, and why you guys are so gung-ho in getting him out of that particular ministry. We're talking to Floyd Shivambu, Deputy President. Let's take a break now.